Free hugs for everybody. I know, hugs for everyone. Can I get a hug? I want a hug. Hi, beautiful. Thank you for that hug. It's good to see you. It's real. You can blow on it.
So, welcome everybody. You just watched a video that I think will give you an idea of where this is going, what we want to do here. Before I do that, let me introduce. This is Pastor Jonathan and Lori Green. They are the pastors of Praises of Zion Church over here, right off of Emile Avenue. These are great people, great friends of mine. But you watched that video. Of course, this is my wife, Pastor Heather. And we want to welcome you. We're going to tackle some pretty tough situation, and we're not gonna. I don't think we're gonna solve it here and now, but I think we're going to get the ball rolling, at least in our community, on what we would like to see. That video, I think, is probably puts it better than anything. Is we see a little girl, and she's obviously of a mixed race there of black and white, and I'm using terminology that I hate using, black or white, but it is what it is. It's what our world identifies, and so I'm going to use it for the sake of conversation. She was walking around randomly hugging people without discrimination, without any sense of hesitation or reservation, and it really struck a chord in me of how much prejudices and racism is taught. It is demonstrated. It is shown. It is even orchestrated in some families and some lines. But you see how a little girl can do and be completely free with her heart and her life because nobody taught her anything other than just to love people. And that's really what this is about. My heart is breaking over where our nation is right now. And if anything, I want to have real conversations because I think this is where I'm at on this. I feel like we have two extremes. We have the one extreme where people are saying, oh, there's no such thing, there's no racism, blah, blah, blah. This is all, the system trying to, or the people or some evil entity behind it and trying to just make people think something. And then you have the other side saying that the system's against everybody and the whites are against the blacks. And I think that those sides are polar opposites, and I think they're both off. But I think somewhere in the middle is where we land at on where I think our world really is. I think a lot of people are prejudiced and even racist, and I think those two differ. For me, they differ. I think someone could be prejudiced, but I think when someone becomes racist, it becomes an action and not just a thought or a belief. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's just my own idea of it. But I think for me, I think somewhere in the middle, where we land at, I want to tell you how we met. My wife and I came here almost 10 years ago. We planted the church, and he came by after one of the services and introduced himself and said, I'm Pastor Green. I pastor Praises of Zion. I said, oh, yeah, hey, nice to meet you. You pastor the black church. And our relationship began with him.
What did you say?
with him straightening me out. And he said, no, I don't pastor the black church. I'm not a black, I pastor a church. I'm just a pastor pastoring a church. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, man, I'm sorry. And the friendship began. And so for me, that was amazing. Can I just ask you guys, because I want to have a real conversation here about the issue, because there is a racial divide between the blacks and the whites in particular. There is. And, we know the history. We don't have to get into the history of slavery and all that. It was the horrors of it. But let's just talk about a little bit about some of maybe your experiences on some of this, and then also maybe a way forward from here.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting us to have this conversation. And I think where we need to start is, and we were talking about even before the cameras came on, is that we try to put everybody in the same box. That's what we tend to do, try to put everybody in the same box. And everyone's individual experience is special to them. And everyone has different experiences. I grew up in Oakland, California, Oaktown, East Side, California, and I, at a very, early age, I grew up in 1965, so right in the middle of a lot of racial tension. And as I grew up understanding that, especially at that time, there was a difference in our world. In the last 20 years, I mean, and it seems like it's so far away, and people say it's so far away, but within the last 20 years, I walked into a restaurant in California and was refused service because I was black. Wow. And within the last 20 years. And so when you look at that, I was like, wow, my friend that was with me, my white friend, one of my closest friends, he said, Jonathan, go out in the parking lot and I'll order food for you. And then you come in. That's a reality in California. So when you talk about racism, prejudices, it's even, that's 20 years, it's alive and well. It's alive and well. But here in Lake County, we're in Lake County, and I would have thought, even though I am a chaplain with the sheriff's department, I would have been stopped in 12 years that I've been here. I've never been stopped. But when I was in Oakland, I used to get stopped every other week because of the car I drove. So when you look at that, and my reality is that it is real. But how does it affect my life? And that's where you go to. And I believe, first of all, my relationship with Jesus Christ is bigger than any racism, bigger than any prejudice, that I know who I am in him. So I live, move, and breathe in him. And so I'm not held back. You're my friend. I have many different friends. I pastor a church that's 50% almost multicultural in all areas, multicultural, multi-relational, multi-ethnic. I came, and being honest, I came to Clear Lake to pastor the black church, which you would say the black church. But God did something that was supernatural that I didn't even see coming. And if you look at the scriptures says, how can you say that you love God and hate your brother, God that you haven't seen, but hate your brother that you see every day? You can't do it. So you can't be a Christian and be a racist.
Yeah, I like that. Can you guys touch on this? 'Cause I feel like this is more of a sin problem than a skin problem, and I feel like this is the real enemy here is enmity versus ethnicity, where we think that it's ethnicity that is driving the hate, driving the division, driving the rhetoric. But for me, it feels more like enmity. What are your guys' thoughts on that, as far as what's driving this?
I think you hit on it earlier. I think racism is taught. Hatred is taught. That is not something that is learned. Prime example, your video that you open with a little child going around and hungry. Children don't know race. Children know children. Children know that's someone I identify with because they're my age. Here's someone I can play with. They don't look at all the other things. And it almost goes back to what Jesus said. Jesus said, you have to be like a child to enter into the kingdom. And so we have to really, I think, get to a point where we have to change our mindset and start thinking like a child. That over there is a child of God. Not a race, not a different background, not economical or anything, or you come from this section of the city or whatever. That's a child of God. We have to look at God, at one another, how God looks at us. He doesn't look at the color of our skins. We're spirits to him. He just put us in these bodies because this is what we need to live on earth. But we're spirits. And if we could get to the mindset and accept people as their spirit. Yeah, don't get me wrong, there's some bad spirits. There's some evil spirits. And yeah, those spirits we might want to steer clear of, but there's still spirits that even those spirits, God's still trying to save them. God's still trying to work on them. And so we have to look at things a little bit differently. And if we start really looking at the Bible and how God has commanded us to love, he doesn't tell us to love just because you're like this or because you want to go to this church or whatever. No, he commanded us to love irregardless, no matter what. And so that's where we have to get to. It's beyond race. I think here in California, this is just my opinion on things. I think in California, we have fooled ourselves sometimes to think that racism really is not here as much because we see so much diversity here. We see a lot more inclusion here compared to going to South Carolina or Georgia or other states, because we see that here. We see different races together. We see different nationalities together, and we see different race, all that together. But then you step outside of California, it's a lot different. And so I think we have deluded ourselves that it's not really here. It's not really here. It's other places. All this stuff is happening in other areas. And I think now that this has happened and it has opened our eyes to everything that is still here. It's still present. And so we have to really work on, like you said, having this type of dialogue, not being afraid to address these matters and talk about it and understand that everybody's life situation is real to them. But there's nothing wrong because that's what they were, how they learned. That's how they grew up. And it's not necessarily wrong. The hatred that was taught might be wrong. But you know what? You have a different way. We grew up on collard greens and maybe you grew up on spinach.
I didn't
It's
do
different.
that. I grew up on
different.
spinach.
It's definitely,
But
it's definitely different.
different.
It feels like the world wants to make the narrative a blanket coating, a broad brush where everybody is either X or Y. And I think that that's the scary narrative for me, because it feels like most people are more inclined to believe the worst in everybody instead of the best in everybody. For me, I feel like I read statements and it broad brushes me or broad brushes blacks, and I get angry about it. Like when I read a statement that says, all the blacks want to do is just loot, and I'm like, what are you talking about? That's just so stupid.
Jonathan,
have you
bring
seen the
them
looting
home.
videos? There's white people there too. It's like what, and it's a broad brush like that, or all the white people just they want to quiet the protest down and so they use the loot, and that's a broad brush, and it's
Right,
like I feel like if we don't get past this generalizing and start seeing people individually, we're going to continue to travel. This train is on the tracks, and we're never going to bring it to a stop if we don't individually see people as human beings that are breathing the breath of God from themselves.
Yeah, individuals, and we were talking about that earlier, that we have to accept each person's reality because they were brought up in a different context. And you can't just put everybody in the same pile, and when we do that, and I think this is a problem right now, this is why we have such an uprising, because those folks that are peacefully protesting, they want to be heard. And when they speak, it's one thing to speak, it's one thing to hear, but it's another thing to listen. And I believe what they're craving is that someone listens, instead of letting someone put their own narrative to their lives. And so I believe that's when we get in trouble, when we say it can't be that bad. That's like a soldier coming from overseas that had fought in Iraq, and he now has the PTSD, and we never been to Iraq, never been to war, and we say it can't be that bad. We just took his reality away from him, and now he's left, and that's why we have so many soldiers coming back from war messed up, because no one's listening to them, because there's somebody saying it can't be that bad. And I believe in the African American community, we have people writing that narrative, saying it can't be that bad. But to that individual, that's their reality. That's really their reality. It's that's their reality, that they're getting stopped by police weekly because of the car they're driving. It's a reality if they're could be hanging out with friends, not necessarily doing anything wrong, that the police come and checking folks out, and they didn't do anything wrong. That's their reality. And when I'm gonna say it like this, we're gonna have a real conversation. This morning, guess what? I woke up black. When I go to sleep tonight, I'm going to sleep black. I can't take that and change. I'm black. And so when other people try to rewrite their narratives, I believe that's why they feel that they're not being heard. No one's listening. And now we have the situation we are in now because somebody has taken them, just like you said, and put everybody in the same box.
I think that's why this is the case, because when you see that video with George Floyd, thank you. I've been wanting to call him George Floyd for the reason. But George Floyd, it breaks that. It's like it opens up your eyes to see that, oh, wait a second. And so it goes beyond, wait, no, this is not just a Black thing. This is a humanity thing. That's just not right. And I think that is the reason why, you can live in reality, in your own reality. Oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But when you see it and you see it clearly, it's like, wow, this is real. I kind of want to make it go back to the Bible on this. It's like Thomas. Thomas said, I'm not going to believe until I feel the nail prints in his hand. Some situations we hear about, we can discount them because we haven't seen them. But for a lot of people, they got to see before they believe. And when they had seen it, it's like, wow, this actually happened? This would have never happened. But you can now no longer discount something that you've seen. And so, like I said, we've heard about so many other people. We never just seen it. Ahmad or the Breonna and all those. Yeah, we heard about it. We didn't really see it. So we're like, oh, that's bad. But when you see it face to face and you're confronted with it, then you have to kind of deal with it. I think that's where we are. We're dealing with it. And like I said, it's good that we're having the conversation because there are realities like this out there. And we can't blanket everybody. This is not all police departments. This is not everybody in a police department. You're right. We can no longer blanket things like that. We have to figure out who the problem lies with, deal with those individuals and start teaching and start educating people, especially in the church. Because I really believe the church has a large responsibility because
we have the responsibility.
Yeah. Because really we set the standard. We set the bar. Hey, if we can't love each other from church to church, irregardless of what faith you are, because really God has established it all by himself. He says, you got to love. You have to love. And it's almost like my brother years ago, he preached a sermon, The Christian's Foreign Policy. And he says, bless them that curse you. Do good to them that despitefully use you. That's not right. That's not the way, but guess what? It's the Christian way. And so it's the same principle. Those folk that do you wrong, you got to look beyond all that. And you still got to live what Christ has, the Christ that's in you.
And I also think this is the cell phones, cameras. These things have been going on for years, but no one saw anything because there was no cameras present. I mean, earlier this week, and I think this whole week has been just
longer than
a couple of weeks.
Sheltering in place played a big part in it too.
But I don't know if you saw the Amy Cooper in Central Park. There was a black man bird watching in Central Park. He's bird watching in Central Park, watching his birds, and a lady comes with her dog off a leash. The dog is off leash, and he says, "Hey, this part of the park, you're supposed to have your dog on a leash because of the birds." And the lady just comes indignant with him, saying, "You can't tell me what to do." And he says, "You're not supposed to have your dog off leash." And then she says, "I'm going to call the police and tell them that you are assaulting me and harassing me." And so she's going through telling him what you're going to do. You better leave me alone. And she ends up calling the police. Her whole countenance changes and says, "Help me. This black man is assaulting me." And I think the world was just like, wait a minute. Does this really happen?
But it was
she racially made sure she racially motivated the police and even stimulated. But to be fair to that story, he did make some threats to her too, by his own admission, actually. So just to be fair to that story, he did threaten her, but that has nothing to do with what she did. I think that's the real story there. The real story is how she said a black man. It was,
and she, her whole thing,
and that was the gearing of it. But he did threaten her dog and her. So by his own admission. But just to be fair to the story, because there'll be people that see this and go, wait a minute. So for those that are, But the real story there is, of course, how
she changed her countenance.
Her everything.
Her voice changed. Everything changed.
It went to the hysteria because he's black. And my thing is this: when can we stop identifying people by something as insignificant as a pigment? Why is that such a significance in our society? Why is that so powerful that that's the one thing that we first acknowledge about somebody? Oh yeah, I met this guy, black guy. Why is that? Or a white guy, whichever. You know what I mean? If the black folks do this the same way, and so why? What has to happen? Here's what I want to say. What has to happen is we have to stop. We have to do what Dr. Martin Luther King said. Stop judging people by the color of their skin instead by the content of their character. So we have to take time to inward look. I preached on last Sunday. I talked about how it's okay to feel that what happened to George was horrible and wrong. And it's okay to say that there's some stuff that needs to be straightened out in the police station, and they need to do some profiling on some of their people because there's some real abusers going on there. It's okay to say it's okay to protest, and also it's okay to say it's not okay to loot, and see somewhere in the middle there. And then what I did was that was something going on Facebook, and what I did was there was 4 blank spots. All these circles were intertwined, and there you were in the middle. It says you could be in the middle here on all these views and still be okay. It's not wrong to say those 4 things and believe those 4 things. And there's not one side or the other. You don't have to be okay. It's okay to protest and loot. It's you know what I mean. It's okay to say what happened to George is wrong. What the police did was wrong. These men need to be prosecuted. They need to go to jail. They need to go to prison. The protesters are in their rights, and they have a right to do that, and it's okay for them to let their voice be heard. The looters are wrong, and they're taking advantage, and it's greed that's causing them to silence the voice and take away the narrative, change the narrative from the protesting about a real issue, and making it about where people are like, well, this is just about greed. And it takes and it washes away the issue here. And so I think what we have to do is we have to make some changes on our dialogue, like you were saying, Lori, and talk differently and start talking to people. And what I said was we have to have the 4 pillars of the Christian faith there from Acts chapter 2, where, continuing in the apostles' doctrine, the fellowship with the saints, the breaking of bread, and in prayers.
I preached that last week before last.
If you break bread with somebody, that's a time when you're fellowship with somebody, you start to realize they're just like me. Me and this guy are so much alike. It's crazy. The way we think, the way we do things, the way we deal with, we're so much alike. And believe it or not, so are these two, just the way they're strong and they're very supportive of us, but they could step out and lead in a moment if we was to step back. And so that's the thing about us, is there's so much more alike about us than there's different. And our society focuses on a pigment that is literally the least important thing about anybody. Is a pigment. And it's crazy to me that we have conversations like that. So I hate identifying you. Whenever I try to talk about you, I usually don't say, yeah, my black pastor friend. I refuse to do that because I hate saying that. Because I don't like identifying you like that's who you are. Like this is like black, that's what you are. White, that's what I am. I mean, that's not who we are. It's really not who we are. So, what are your thoughts on that, babe? Because you're one of the most compassionate. You're one of the most compassionate people I know. And
I think for this, what happened to George, for me, it was an awakening. I think if people are not directly affected, we're self-centered, So when I seen this, I was like, oh my gosh. First, it's disgusting. 2, I think it comes down to human decency, like you were saying, moral, sin. Because for me, my upbringing was like I'm not a racist. Like my parents dated different ethnics and different things, and it was never it wasn't a reality to me. So when I looked at this, I was like, oh, this is real. We actually need to have conversations about this. And I was talking to him about it. We need to have conversations with our kids and like, what's your thoughts about this? And I think it's so important to open up conversations like this, because I don't think people like realize, like you're saying, like we come from different worlds, completely different worlds. Like, you know, I've never been through what you've been through, you know what I'm saying? So I believe that we need to open up conversations. I think people have the tendency to be really self-centered. And I think, like you guys were saying, and one thing that I've learned with pastoring is people want to be heard. Just listen to them. Just whether it's about race, whether it's about depression, whether it's about anxiety or fear, you can't discount what people are going through, because their reality is their reality.
That's right.
And we have to give them that conversation and make them feel safe. And so I think grand scheme, one thing I was when we were here Sunday, when we were worshiping, and I was just speaking with the Lord, I was just really grieved, like to see our country just torn apart, the division. To me, that grieves me. And the Lord told me, he said, if people would just relate to each other as brother and sister, because the division is what grieves him the most, because we're sisters and brothers. You're not black, we're not white. That's not how he sees us. We're children. When we go home and spend eternity with him, he's not looking at our race. And so it grieves me, because we're all fighting with each other, and we need to love, and we need to understand, and we need to give people conversations, and we need to make people feel safe. The thing is, I think this is going to awaken a lot of people.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's real. It is real. And we can't discount things. We have to go away. We have to go around it a certain way. There was this pastor I was listening to on Instagram, and he said, first, it's an individual problem. Lies within us. Then it's a home problem. What are we teaching our kids? And then he says it's a church problem. And then you take it higher to the courts and different things and lawmakers. But if we can't get our own heart right, and we can't get our children right, how is anybody going to listen to us? Like, we're divided right there. So really it comes down to decency, having a righteous relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think the church has gone astray somewhere. Like no one really wanted to talk about this, I think, because maybe it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But they're like he was saying, you have to be somewhere in the middle, okay? It can't be discounted, but it's not as bad as everybody's saying too. Because like you were saying, and like you guys were saying, police officers are good. 90% of them are good. 90% of Americans are good. And it's like you see with these protests, you know, most of them are peaceful. It's the ones that get behind and have the evil things that are going on in their own heart to just make this worse. So I don't know. I feel really passionate about it.
I do too. I feel like this. I feel like unless I'm willing to learn where I'm at now, I'll never be able to lead where I want to be. And I've noticed some things that I do, and I didn't notice them. Matter of fact, the last time you called me, I did it. And what I did was I get, for no other way to say it, I get hood. Sometimes when I get around some of my black friends.
He starts talking different.
I do.
He starts
now,
trying.
I ran around in the hood. So that was what it wasn't like I'm not putting on anything. All I'm doing is reviving something that I was. And I don't do it with white people. And I noticed it the last time you called, I was like, why did you do that? Why did you just do that? Because he's black. Like, that's how I gotta relate to you. That's racist. It's racism. There's no other way to say it. If I act different towards you than I do with anybody else, that's the definition of a prejudice or racism.
I changed too. I mean, reality. Let's talk reality. When I get around certain people, I grew up in the hood. I grew up East Side, Oakland.
But too short.
Too short. E40. You know. So I think what tends to happen is we tend to go to our comfort zones. That's just human nature. We tend to revert back to our comfort zones. But also too, one of my closest friends is a self-proclaimed atheist, but he's my friend. And I think that's what we, I think Heather was talking about, divide. The enemy has gotten us into this division mode, to divide. We want to be divided by politics. We want to be divided by churches. We want to be divided by religious organizations, your Pentecostal denominations, you're Baptist, you're Episcopalian, you're Catholic. There is so much division and lines being crossed. But I can love a Democrat. I can love a Republican. And we don't have to, I can love an independent. We don't have to agree, but we agree on one thing, Jesus Christ. And with my atheist friend, we can't even agree with that. But he's still my friend. So I believe we find common places and not just cut off, we're a body, and not just cut off my leg because I don't agree with you.
I have a question that I'd like for you guys to address. What is I had some of my staff just submit some questions, and there was too many. I can't do it all, just a couple. What is your advice to a Caucasian person on having a conversation with a person of another race about these current events? How would you suggest that the Caucasian goes about that conversation without inciting any accusations of racism or making them feel as if it's racism, especially if the two disagree on some of the points in the conversation? Listen, because they're coming from a different perspective, and you have to respect that. Even it could make no sense to you at all, but you have to listen and respect where they're coming from. And if you listen, you'll hear them. You'll hear their pain, if it's pain. You'll hear their anguish, if it's anguish, and you have to just come to the realization it's real for them. Perception is reality. Perception is reality, and I think that is probably one of the most important things we can do is listen.
The other thing is be willing just to open the dialogue. One of the things that for me just this week during at work, I have a morning meeting every day with my group. The dynamic is I'm the only Black person in my department. There is a gentleman, he's the only guy in the department, but he is from Colombia, and the other three ladies are all white. And so after a lot of this stuff was happening, we just regular morning meeting, and my boss typically does this anyway. How are you doing? She asks each of us, but she says, Lori, how are you really doing? How is this affecting you? Be willing to open the dialogue. How is this? Be free to share. I might not understand, but I'd like to hear your feelings because I might get a better perspective. And so I think just being willing to open that dialogue, give them the freedom to express and realize that even though they're expressing anger, even though they're expressing disappointment, it's not directed at you personally. It's there, but they have to be free and feel like I'm still safe to express these feelings that I'm feeling when I see this, the anger, the disappointment. And I was like, wow. By the time I finished, I felt so good that thank you for making this a safe environment for me to even share this and not be willing to condemn me because I feel this way. Because it's real. It was real to me how I felt, and it was interesting after we started talking about it more and more, because that we didn't talk about work that morning. We only talked about this. It was interesting to get different perspectives about it, because I was talking about how much I hated the violence and I hated the looting and I didn't like this. But my boss, who was white, she's like, you know what, Lori? I was listening to something about this, and I think the violence might have been needed, because the violence maybe was the spark to get us to this point. And I'm like, the violence? How do you want the violence? But it made me see her perspective as well. And so when you are willing to engage, this is not a time to fight, because if you're my friend, really, and you really want to understand, you're going to take the time to even open it up. You can feel safe. You can talk about it. But you know what? I also want to go back to what you said, Heather, because you're right. Ultimately, it's got to start with us. It's got to be an individual thing. I think Michael Jackson was on to something when he sung that saying, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. It's got to start with us. It's very interesting to find that we are actually, especially our generation, we're between two generations. We're between our parents. They lived, through civil rights. That was their reality. We kind of know about it because, that was the aftermath. We know Dr. King. We know about the marches. And so we know more about it. So we're kind of on that straddling of the fence kind of thing. And I think most of the hatred and the racism is in the prior generation. And we straddle the fence. Whereas our children, they're different. They don't see as much of it. I think they're a little more, and I think if we start with ourselves and we deal with our own issues, then we can help them, or actually they probably could help us, because they don't deal with as much as, like I said, it's amazing to me when I see young kids. I even look at my youngest daughter. It's like almost none of her friends, her immediate friends, are Black right now. It was like, oh, okay, none of them. But she's like, she doesn't care. It's like, that's not important to me, because I like this person. This person has the same interest as me, and I like being with this person. She can care less about race.
I have another question, and then I want to just pose a question to all of you. This is from one of the staff here. She is, her dad's Black and her mom's white. And the only question she has on her heart is, what advice would you give someone of a mixed race feeling torn by the whole situation, but especially with different reactions of friends and family? What advice would you give her on how to navigate her white family and her Black family?
Wow.
And Black friends and white friends, I assume.
The reality is that our generation, those generations, there really are very few. Put it this way, I would say, when you talk about true Blacks and true whites, when you look at younger generations, they have so many mixed races now that they are the majority. And so I would tell her, embrace both sides of you. You're both. You're not one or the other. You don't have to choose a side. You have to feel what you feel, understand what's right and wrong, because you know what's right and wrong. But embrace both sides of you. You're both. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And I think I said it earlier, that we don't have to pick a side. Everybody want to pick a side. You know what? I know for a fact that me and Mitch don't agree on everything.
Right.
We don't. But it doesn't matter because I like Mitch, and I hopefully he likes me.
Right.
And we're friends.
He loves you.
Love you too. And we're friends. So, we have to learn to exist when there's conflict. We have to learn to exist when we don't agree. We have to learn to exist when we don't see eye to eye. And I think we have made a commitment to be friends. And we can navigate in all of that stuff and remain friends and not saying, okay, since he doesn't believe this, well, he's not my friend anymore.
And also is keeping in mind, especially when you look at the friendship, even though you have differences, the main thing is that you have Christ in common. And for the church, the universal church, that's more important than anything. It's more important than any politics. It's more important than any race. It's more important than anything is that, you know what? He's been blood washed. He's a believer in God. And that's why I'm going to love him anyway. And so that has to be the catalyst behind most things.
It has to be premier. It has to be premier.
It has to be.
The way that we should see each other. I think one of you said earlier that the church has a responsibility. And I said, I believe it has the responsibility.
Right.
I think the church is the moral compass, always has been, always should be.
Yeah.
And I think as the church morality lowers, so does the world's. And as we raise ours, the world raises with it. It is, I'm telling you, I have seen it so clearly. As the church lifts its standards, the world raises its standards. We have more influence than we believe. And so for me, I read scriptures in Luke 21, Matthew 24, and Jesus said that in the last days that ethnos will rise against ethnos. And that's the Greek word where we get our word English ethnicity from. We know that is a reality, and we're seeing the beginnings of that now in the world. As the church, I think we have to have more candid conversations and some real introspection because there's statistics you could quote to say that police are just as brutal to whites as they are to blacks. But the difference is this. The whites aren't running around afraid.
Right.
That's the difference. And for me, that's all that matters. Forget the statistic. It doesn't matter. The fear is what matters. That's the reality. And if we don't deal with that reality, whether we can go, well, the statistics, forget that. That doesn't even matter. The matter is there are people running around afraid, genuinely afraid. And I think we have to deal with that as Christians. We have to talk about that. We have to start literally having these conversations with each other, with our families, with our church folks, and so that we can be the change, the catalyst that you said, the catalyst, person by person, group by group, city by city. Our county can be different. We don't have to be like every other rural redneck county.
No.
We don't have to be that.
No.
We can literally be a county that exemplifies the unity of Christ. I believe that there is going to be a last day revival right here where we are.
Absolutely.
And I believe the key to that is if we can come together. And if we allow that outer influence of the racial divide to infect us, we're done. We're doomed. The church is done. And so I want to just kind of get your closing thoughts on each of that. Babe, start with you on just the world's atmosphere versus our role in that. As Jesus said that the race would rise against race. What are your thoughts on combating that?
Well, I want to say something real quick too. I think too, just with different races, I think it comes from past hurts of what happened in the past. Because if we really want to talk about it, like people were told to sit on the back of the bus because of the color of the skin. So I think there's a lot of root systems and a lot of past and hurts, and people are feeling that, and it's coming out and it's being exposed. And then I just kind of think about Jesus too. You know, he was a Jew and he was discriminated too, so he can relate to these past hurts. But I think the thing is, like you guys were saying, is no one talks about it. So when we don't talk about it, it just festers, and hate and evilness comes out because they think, okay, if I talk about this, I'm going to be perceived the wrong way. I'm a racist because of what I feel. And I really think to combat this, one, it's always going to be an individual thing, but we have to give people the platform to feel safe. Like Jonathan was saying, like, you can disagree. Like right now, there's so many, like, I feel like people are like, even with politics, even with this pandemic, it was like everybody's in so much division. If you wear a mask, if you don't wear a mask, if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, and we forget, like, what is center? Jesus Christ. He's the Lord of our life. He saved us. We were saved by grace. That's one thing that we can all say, is that we were saved by grace. And so if we can address the past hurts and give them a conversation, we know this, that the Bible says that race is going to rise up. Are we going to be able to get rid of all racism? No. We'll never will. No. But we can do our part. Absolutely. We can have conversations. We should make our heart right. Make sure my kids' hearts are right. Make sure my church hearts are right. We need to, like, really, like, people are talking about, like, okay, well, we can't just talk about it. There has to be action. Right. There has to be action. You know, and they were talking about getting out there in the community, one family at a time, fellowshipping with people who are different than you. You know, it gets awkward when you're in different, like, you get around people that are just different and you don't know how to relate to them, and it becomes awkward. But we just need to make that conversation with people, because yeah, there is racial things. There's people that are coming out of gangs. There's people coming out of addiction. I don't understand the whole gang atmosphere, but I need to understand. I understand addiction because I've been in it, but I can't discount gangs. I can't discount racial divide. I think that we really need to have this conversation and just get it out there. Be vulnerable.
More than once.
Be vulnerable.
More than once. And
yeah.
I just want you guys to know that there's going to be follow-ups of this, where we just continue this conversation, and getting other people involved in it as well. So.
Right. I just have to agree with you. It has to start with you. Yeah. You have to take a really introspective look of yourself, and see how you see things. I know with me personally, I have to look at some things. I'm different now than I was even 5 years ago, because we are changing. We have to be willing to look at ourselves, and we don't like looking at ourselves, if truth be told, because we want to fool ourselves. But you have to look at yourself, be honest with yourself, and then be willing to, like you said, open those dialogues. These are hard conversations. They're not easy. But when you do, when you're willing to open the dialogue, give the people the right to feel how they are going to feel. That's their feeling. Make them feel safe. And then also keep in mind that even though we have so many things that are different, we have something that's the same, and that's greater than any of it. And we have Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. If you have that, it's bigger than any division. It's bigger than any race. It's bigger than any problem, because guess what? We can come together and we can figure out a way to work through so many of these things, as long as we are willing to always put God first.
I think going back to reality, everyone's reality is different. There's mothers that have sons that cringe every time their sons leave the house, wondering if they're going to have a confrontation with the police. Will they get stopped? And so it's not only and I'm thinking that young man that goes out saying, what's going to happen when I go out? Think about the parents, that mother, that father. Their reality is, it's almost that word post-traumatic disorder. They have post-traumatic stress disorder, wondering if their child's going to come home. So I think that we need to deal, again, with each one's reality and give that a voice and reassurance. I thank God for our county. I thank God for Sheriff Martin. I think he has come a long way in bringing Lake County into a place that's not exclusive but inclusive. So I appreciate him, and I appreciate our community, how we don't see the looting here. We don't see the divide. It's here. It's here. But we have learned, hopefully this dialogue will help us move forward in our each and every one of our realities.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it. For time's sake, just want to say thank you guys so much just for coming on here and just being transparent and just talking. I definitely I feel like this is an issue. Like the Lord said, He said, "Son, you can't run over this like a speed bump. You can't. It doesn't work like that." And then He said, you're at a 4-way stop sign. And what direction you take from here is going to determine where you end up. And so if I'm not willing to learn where I'm at, I'm never going to lead where I want to be. So that's a big thing for me. And I think that the pace that we run as a learner will determine the pace we run as a leader. And so I'm trying to learn where I'm at right now and run that pace hard. I wish it was easy. I wish I could just say, boom, done, and be done with it, and then the issue is solved. I wish everybody would just have my mindset where they just stop seeing people as colors and just seeing people as people, the breath of God in people, literally, the breath of God, the same breath of God. And here's what's crazy. The same breath of God that was in George was in that cop. I mean, that's the inherent value of every single soul that's around us. And if we see that, if we truly begin to understand that, like the Bible says in Acts, that we all come from one blood. I mean, we all come from one blood. There's literally no difference between us. And so, man, I want to continue these. I want to do some more of these down the road. And I'm not kicking this can down. I mean, here in a few weeks, we get and do another one maybe next month, and just kind of continue to educate and talk about stuff. Even talk about Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean? I think, we need to talk about that too. The movement. I mean, not because every Black life matters.
All life.
No, I know
matter.
that. All lives do matter, but all Black lives matter.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm talking about the movement itself. I want to get into that and just get it from you guys' perspective as well, and just get into that because I think there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, different things. But ultimately, this is for the helping of our communities, our churches, and our families and things like that. Thank you guys for watching. We love you guys, and stay tuned for more of this with these amazing people. This is Pastor Jonathan and Lori Green. They pastor the amazing church, Praises of Zion, over there. They are amazing people and good friends of ours. Of course, this is my lovely, beautiful wife, Heather Rodgers. And love you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.